Good morning. Everybody grab a seat, please. Last chance to get a cup of coffee if you haven't. There are a few people circling around the parking lot. Thank goodness we have Provost Charles Cook here, so if you get a parking ticket, just ask him. Thank you, ACC, for hosting us. We appreciate having this wonderful auditorium at Eastview. Everybody got a seat? You don't have to sit at one of the open tables. You can fill in some spots wherever you'd like. Good morning. On behalf of the Charles Dana Center and the E3 Alliance, we would like to welcome you for what we think is a really momentous, important, we hope exciting gathering to really move us forward in the ways that we haven't been able to for the last few years in mathematics alignment. And we appreciate all of you being here to represent your organizations, universities, colleges across the region. We've got myself, Carolyn Reed from ACC, Derek McDaniel from Hayes, Uri Treisman and Paula Talley from the Dana Center are all going to be talking to you this morning. There are others who've been intimately part of this, including Doug Savdi, who just had surgery, so he won't be here. But thanks to the Dana Center and to the E3 staff for putting this together. We've got 3 meeting outcomes that we are gathering for today. The first is to review the mathematics recommendations that we've got. The task force has been working over the last 4.5 months to really come together on what we think are important recommendations to put before you today and to engage not just with people from your own institution, but others at your table in the room, other sectors to understand how these impact each of us differently, and most importantly, to commit to moving forward with a sense of boldness, with a sense of urgency that we can make change happen. We have the right people in the room to do it, and we want to do it. So who is in the room? We have both here today and throughout the last 4.5 months, districts from across the region, institutions of higher ed from across the region, government agencies, private sector. If you were on the Central Texas Math Alignment Task Force, can you stand up and just thank you for all the work that you've done? We really appreciate it. These guys have been really coming together in a very, very intense way. We wanted the summer off. We didn't get it, but hopefully you'll see that a lot of work has been done and brought us forward quickly. So why are we here? We are here because too few students take the math they need to succeed in higher ed with the credentials that they aspire to that can lead them to the careers that they aspire to. And we know that from a lot of data. Many of you know that E3 Alliance is fond of data boarding people. That's torture by data. We're not going to do that today, but I wanted you to have just a little grounding from the first piece of work that the Greater Texas Foundation funded around mathematics alignment, where we looked at students from the entire state of Texas and said, based on what math you took and passed in high school, how did that align with later outcomes? So if you look at the yellow line, that's students who took and passed Algebra 2, and then the pink line is those who took another year of math, pre-calculus, and then yet another year of math that could be a dual credit or AP or IB or some level of college level math. And what happened from graduating on time all the way through the pipeline of enrolling in higher ed, persisting, completing, most important what you'll find is that we're lying to students in the state of Texas, right? After HB5, we said that Algebra 2 and any math past that is optional for almost every student. If you take and pass Algebra 2, you have less than a 1 in 5 chance of getting any post-secondary credential within 6 years. A 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, a certificate, anything within 6 years. And in fact, if we want to achieve our 60 by 30 goal, we predict that you need to take 2 more maths beyond Algebra 2, which is now optional for almost every student in the state of Texas. So this basic conversation that we've been having for the last couple of years is why we came together to understand what it is that we need to do to change these outcomes. So we know too few students are taking the math they need. We also know that a student who takes 4 years of math in high school and the most advanced math that they can, that doesn't necessarily mean calculus. We'll talk a lot about that today. It could be a whole variety of things. They're far more likely to succeed. And in fact, our data and our industry partners tell us only about 1/3 of students need the traditional pathway that most of us took. Algebra 2, geometry Algebra 2, pre-calculus, calculus. That's not necessarily the pathway that we need. Alternate pathways exist, yet they're not aligned. They're not working for students today. And when you hear that, you may be thinking about the student who wants to go into construction management and that their outcome would be better aligned with advanced geometry, perhaps, than doing quadratic equations. That is true, but it's also true, speaking to leaders around the region, this happens to be the dean of the medical school who is training our best and brightest doctors, said, well, you know, they're not really going to differentiate equations in med school. What we need is better statistics. We need to open our minds to the kind of math that is best suited to the students and the aspirations that they have. So why are we here? The bottom line is our students are losing time. They're losing money. Many of them are dropping out because we are not serving them well. Our systems are not serving them well. And so what we're here today is provide recommendations to change those systems. So the other thing I want you to think about, I said be bold, be urgent. We have a unique point of time that we didn't have 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. There's a lot of things that are helping put wind behind our sails. We have students early on choosing endorsement pathways to think about ways that they want to go into different kinds of careers and prepare for them. We have new math courses available that TEA is sanctioned beyond just calculus. There are many, many options out there. Maybe not all of them appropriate, many of them appropriate. Our colleges now are moving more and more towards guided pathways where they help students understand these are the courses that you need to take to not just circulate around and like a ping pong ball. What is it that you really need to succeed? We have students who are getting to college who may not be ready that have new options in co-rec developmental ed where they're learning just the competencies they need at the same time that they have credit-bearing classes rather than getting into the dev ed quagmire where they never get out. We have a lot of things working for us, and significantly more than half of the students that come through our school districts here in Central Texas go to our institutions of higher ed in Central Texas. So no, we're not going to solve it for every student, but for the majority of students, if we get our institutions here in this region working together with our school districts here in this region, we can solve a lot of this issue. So with that, I'd like to bring up Dr. Uri Treisman. Probably all of you know Dr. Treisman. He is the University Distinguished Mathematics faculty member at UT Austin. He's head of just about every institution that you could be, including urban school districts. A legend in his own mind. The thing that I like most about Dr. Treisman that many of you might not know is that in his left pocket here, he carries around a tattoo pen so that for every single one of these institutions in the country, he goes around, he visits them, he heads them in many cases, he's on their executive committees, he tattoos on their left arm that we need to change the way we do mathematics and how we're going to do that. And so we're thankful for that, and he's going to share with us how you're doing that.
So good morning. Usually I'm at these meetings as director of the Dana Center. Today I'm here as the representative of my math department. It's just wonderful to see all the faculty from the school districts and other higher ed institutions, because modernizing the curriculum is, the further you are away from the classroom, the easier change seems. We're at a special moment, and that is modernizing a curriculum so that it prepares people for upward social and economic mobility. That's what we need in our society today. Everybody needs to understand that through hard work and education, they can have a better life for their family and their community. So we're at a wonderful moment where all the muckety-mucks, the National Academy of Sciences, the Conference Board of Mathematical Sciences, all 17 professional associations, have called for revising the curriculum. They've pointed out that the curriculum we now teach, which is algebra intensive, was a product of Sputnik, the space race. It was a time when national security required the production of more people in math-intensive fields. Today, most of the need for mathematics is outside engineering. Of course, algebra is still critically important, Anyone who thinks that algebra isn't important just doesn't understand what algebra is. But it's clear in a broad cross-section of work, people need to manage data, they need to make quantitative decisions, they need to understand how to manage uncertainty. So for the first time in 50 years, 45 years, the professional societies say it's time to modernize the curriculum. But that's actually going to require that faculty across institutions get together and work out the details. In my department, for the first time, the administration is actually giving us data on our performance. It's sort of amazing that for years, we didn't even know what our students were doing or where they came from. Yesterday, we had a department meeting in which the provost told us that 62% of our graduates in our department actually had more than an average of 15 units from other institutions, mostly regional. In effect, we didn't even know that we're serving the same students as you are. 61% of the students in the UT system now come with college credits from high school, an average of 18 units. So if we're we need to have mechanisms in which we can work together to serve the students that we collectively serve. And what we have to do above all is, as we introduce stat pathways, quantitative reasoning pathways, is we have to work together to make sure we preserve the integrity of the mathematics in the curriculum. The fear is if we introduce new pathways, they will rebuild in tracking patterns. They will be courses in name only with no quality. So in order to do that, the K-12 districts and the higher ed faculty need to sit down. We need to look at each other's assignments. We need to have a level playing field where we can sit down as equals, look at each other's curriculum, homework assignments, and given that our students are going to be in 2 or 3 institutions before they get their degrees, we need to do everything we can to make it easy for them to move from K-12 to their first higher ed, to their second higher ed, and so on. And that's what we're really here to do. We have the policy influencers here, and we have the faculty. And without E3, we could have never pulled this off. We need regional organizations that could bring us together in the interests of our community. So, Susan, we love you. And I look forward to, as my math department, working with each of you. And I just want to give you one measure of the change. One of the great things about getting old is you've seen a lot. So this is an amazing moment for me because the president of my university and provost came to our department and commended us on reducing our DWF rate in calculus from 25 to 15%. That took a lot of work. But what they've asked me to do now is to go back and study each of our failures. They want to know what the social costs are of when a student comes to UT Austin because they're good students and we fail them. And we've just started that process. We've gone out, interviewed the ministers, the scout leaders, and we didn't understand that when we fail a student, the ramifications of that are enormous. It's not just the student who suffers pain and disappointment, but their family, their community, the church leaders, the scout leaders, and so on. We've moved from a time where student success was nice to student success being necessary. And in my wildest dreams, I never imagined that our president would come to the math department and hold us accountable for our failures and ask us to study them, understand them, to put faces to the failure numbers, and for us to be able to tell the stories of the students that we failed to serve well. How's that for cultural transformation? Right. This is cultural transformation. When all of us sit together with our most important mission, serve students together, make sure it's easy for them to move from our K-12 districts, often through ACC, Houston-Tillotson, our local institutions, through Texas State, through UT Austin, and then back into the community. So I think up next is Paula, who will talk more substantively about our hopes for these recommendations and how to bring them to fruition.
Thank you. He's a hard act to follow. So if we look at our data, at the community colleges, only about 23% of our degree programs actually require a calculus course. And at the university level, roughly 38% require a calculus course. Now think about your fall schedule. If you look at the fall course offerings, I bet you a majority of the courses, the freshman level math courses on your schedule are what? College algebra courses. And then think about your dual credit students. Those dual credit students who are actually taking math courses as dual credit, what course do a majority of them take? College algebra. But if you look at the degrees up here, college algebra was meant to be that course that prepares students for calculus, so there's a mismatch in what students are taking and what they actually need. Now, if we look at the community college, roughly 54% of the students who come to the community college are deemed not college ready by a single test score. Now, of those 54%, there's only 24% of those who actually complete a math course, a credit math course, within 2 years. Now, we know there's various factors of why students aren't completing those courses, but one of the reasons we know is we know that for a fact that students who find a course more relevant to them, they're going to try harder in it, they're going to be more successful in it. I love teaching college algebra. It's one of my favorite courses to teach. But when I have a criminal justice student in that class, or I have a psychology student in that class, or a nursing student in that class, I have to think, am I really helping them in college algebra, or would they benefit more being in one of my statistics or my quantitative reasoning courses? What are the skills that they're going to actually need that are going to help them in their future careers? Now, if you look at core curriculum at the public universities, that bottom blue line is statistics. The yellow one is contemporary math, and I move too much. I'm a teacher. I can't stand still, so you got to forgive me. And the green one is college algebra. If you notice, there's an increase in core curriculum for quantitative reasoning, contemporary math, and statistics. College algebra is declining. Now, University of North Texas, they actually took college algebra out of the core because they know that students who are going to take college algebra, they need to be on a STEM path. So those students are specifically going to take college algebra for a reason, because that course is not in the core anymore. And we're actually seeing institutions around the country where they're either renaming college algebra, calling it pre-calculus A and then having pre-calculus B, or they're even kind of redefining that college algebra pre-calculus combination, that sequence. So there's a lot of movements happening with the math pathways and actually trying to make an effort to get the students in the right courses. Now in Texas, when we look at the degrees, we see that liberal arts, fine arts, humanities, we see the pattern that a majority of those should take a quantitative reasoning course. Now quantitative reasoning course, I would describe that more as a numeracy or a modeling course. Are you going to pick up a journal? Are you going to be able to read it, understand the statistics, determine the misuse? We know there's a lot of misuse in statistics. Just have a deep understanding of what's going on with the mathematics. Whereas if you look at social sciences and nursing, those students should probably go a statistics path. Now that's where they're getting more, they can pick up a technical journal and make more sense of it, or they might be participating in some type of research or conducting their own study. You have business accounting, of course we have the business pathway, and we're actually seeing some business programs actually require statistics. And then teaching and education, it has its own, it needs some math for elementary school teachers classes. And then of course your STEM, that's your group that's going to go the college algebra route. Now when you add the endorsements here, it gets a little more confusing. I had to bring my endorsements cheat sheet up here. So of course, the high school endorsements, science, technology, engineering, and math, those should go the calculus path. So when you're looking at going from the higher ed, from K-12 to higher ed, those are going to be going the calculus pathway. Arts and humanities, those students should be going the quantitative reasoning pathway. Now business is interesting when you're looking at the K-12, and so this is where there needs to be some more in-depth, intrusive advising even at the high school level. But business, they have finance, accounting, but then you also have hospitality and tourism on the high school endorsements. So that's why business goes 2 different routes depending on what the student's actually doing. Then your public service goes 3 different routes, because if I look at the high school endorsements, you have criminal justice and law. Those should probably go statistics. You have health science. You have public safety. You have education. So there's a whole mixture of programs actually within that. So at the high school, again, that's where it's going to have to do some digging deeper if we're going to move students into the right pathway. And then, of course, you have multidisciplinary studies that's all over the place. And this also has an impact for that 4th year. So Susan was talking about that 4 years of math. If you're looking at that 4th year, if you're looking at that high school transitions course, are you offering courses that are going to align to any pathway? Are we opening the doors for students? So this work needs to dig down into the high schools and have that alignment throughout. And I think that leads me to Derek.
All right, good morning. How's everybody doing? I'm a little nervous this morning, so you have to forgive me. I was texting my mentor last night. I'm giving a presentation, and I'm following Dr. Uri Treisman. And he said, wow. And so it's all downhill from here. So I'm Derek McDaniel. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction for Hayes Consolidated Independent School District. And I've been serving on the Central Texas Mathematics Alignment Task Force as a co-chair representing K-12 and local school districts, along with Carolyn Reed, who's been serving as the representative for higher education. She's the ACC department chair for mathematics. But I've really been involved in this work for the past 4 years, ever since House Bill 5 came around. So I was previously working in Del Valley ISD as the director of mathematics, and we were coming together as local school districts to try and decipher House Bill 5. What did this mean for us, this major legislation that came down, specifically with mathematics? And what does it mean to be college ready? And this was a tough task, right? We were coming together, and we didn't have all of the stakeholders in the room at the same time. And so we were running into roadblocks. And that's been the challenge ever since House Bill 5 came around. There was some positive things that came out of it, and we have made closer partnerships with ACC, but we haven't had the major policy, programmatic, systematic change because we haven't been together. And so I'd like to thank E3 Alliance and UT Dana Center for bringing us together. We've made more progress in the last 4 months than we have in the past 4 years because we've got everybody in the room together. And so, with that being said, we'll get started. So these were the 13 individuals, the local superintendents and the college presidents that gave us our charge and said, go forth and see what you can do. And they gave us 3 charges specifically. Really look at that alignment of the mathematics course, the mathematics for secondary and post-secondary institutions, and look at that alignment. Recommend actions that are going to make a change. Then it's going to align the math that we have at secondary, the math at post-secondary, and then how does that meet our workforce needs? And then lastly, the charge they gave us was how do we address the equity gaps that the data says we know exist and continue to exist for our students. So how did this start? A year ago, last October, 13 superintendents came together and they started looking at the data and they started asking the question, well, is the data saying go back to a 4x4, right? Because that didn't work well for all of our students. And I think the answer was kind of yes and no, right? We know that that fourth year of mathematics is critical for student success. You saw that chart earlier. But this traditional algebra, pre-calculus, calculus pathway may not be the best for all of our students. And so a committee was formed, and we started out with local school districts, like I said earlier, local school districts, colleges, workforce, government institutions, all coming together to, excuse me, let me look at my notes. I apologize. To come together and to I apologize. To align those math expectations in the courses and the work that needs to be done for those. We started identifying barriers, the quality of instruction, the alignment of our courses, the counseling, right? Proper counseling for our students, identifying these barriers that are keeping kids, especially kids of poverty, especially kids of minority, that are keeping them from success in higher ed. We identified recommendations. We started prioritizing those recommendations and developing the process maps for how to achieve those. Out of that, we came up with 4 primary recommendations. How do we align the math course offerings at secondary, post-secondary? How do we affect the teaching and learning that goes on? We've got to take responsibility for the pedagogy that's in our classrooms and working with our teachers to develop those skills that they need to meet those needs. We also know that the non-cognitive skills are super important, especially in mathematics, right? Time management, study skills, growth mindset. Those things are critical for success in math courses, and they're getting into higher ed, and those are the things that are coming out as students are lacking those skills. And then the last recommendation was, how do we affect the policy and the practices that are going to better support the multiple pathways? So we're here today. Be bold. You heard Dr. Treisman say, we're at a critical juncture in time that we can actually make positive change for thousands of students. And be urgent. If we're going to meet our 60 by 30 goal that the governor has set forth for us, we've got to act now. Like I said, we've been working for 4 years, and there have been some positive outcomes, but we can't go another 4 years and have thousands of kids go through our schools and not make that, not meet their needs to make those change. And so with that being said, I'm going to introduce Carolyn Reed, the ACC Department Chair for Mathematics.
Hi. I always mess up the clicker. I don't know why. So our first recommendation has to do with alignment. It's probably not a surprise. And we want to align secondary and post-secondary math pathways in Central Texas. And kind of going back to why, we've talked a lot about the math pathways movement. We've also talked about, even though we have this national movement, we still see a lot of students who are just put into college algebra because that's just kind of the course everyone knows. And some schools have made the shift and some schools haven't, and we really need to kind of like get together and make sure that we're all following that movement for our students. For example, in nursing, like one school will require statistics for nurses and another school requires college algebra. And so a student's going into nursing, they don't really know what to take. Like, what do they take? And they don't know exactly where they're going to go. And what this is doing is it's hurting our students. They're losing time, they're losing money. We have the 60-hour rule for 2-year degrees and the 120-hour rule. And if they have to take multiple math courses, they're just kind of wasting all that time and money and financial aid. And I always think that right now we're putting students in a pinball machine. Like they go in the pinball machine, we shoot them up and we like flap them around with the flappers. Like they take this math and they're like, oh, now I'm going to go to this goal. Oh, well, you took the wrong thing. Now you have to do this. And then we shoot them somewhere else. And they're just kind of getting knocked around, and a lot of them just kind of, they quit. Or, they're just like, I give up. I've used all my money. I haven't really gotten anywhere. So we're trying to alleviate that problem, and we feel like that's a very big issue right now. And another example is like, you know, I'm at ACC and we've really embraced the math pathways even down to our developmental level in the math department, but we still have a large number of degree plans that still have a choice of the 4 entry-level college math courses because, you know, students don't know where they're going to go and what they're going to do in that particular degree. And advisors and students don't know what's best. I mean, a lot of even faculty sometimes don't know what's best, and we need to give them some direction. Sometimes they see college algebra as a safe choice, but as we've talked about, that really isn't a safe choice. And even all of us in the room may not even agree, like, what is the right math for this degree? So we want to kind of, our goal is to provide clarity and to provide consistency for our students, and particularly even down to the dual credit level. Like we've talked about, a large number of our students in dual credit courses are taking college algebra, and that's really useless if you're not going on to calculus. So we're wasting their time even at the high school level. So we are going to try to uncover and resolve misalignment of math requirements at post-secondary institutions in Central Texas. And then once we've done that, we want to review and revise K-12 math requirements and align advising practices with these requirements. We have a very aggressive timeline because we know that, you know, you have to really get ahead of things. If we want something to start next fall, we have to kind of get it done very, very soon. So here's today. So the first thing we have is we have already done some research and gathered some data, and we have developed a survey. And our idea is that we're gonna have a survey. We're targeting programs with high enrollment that also have misalignment across our post-secondary institutions. And we've used data to kind of assess what those are. And we're gonna send this survey out to, and the survey actually has a list of math skills. So it's not courses, it's actually particular skills that students need. And a program, like say, you know, nursing, since I mentioned nursing before, they'll say, you know, what do we really need our students to be able to do mathematically? And so we're going to send this survey out, and we're hoping to get it out this month and get the results back at the end of this month, because that's just the start. That's just gathering the information to kind of put everyone, wipe the slate clean, put everyone on the same page, and really get an idea of like what math do these programs need. And so we send out the survey end of the month, and then we have, we take the rest of this year through December to determine, based on this information and kind of working with all the schools, what is the course that we can all agree and identify to be that the course that they need for that particular program major. And then we will need to put that in our course catalogs and our degree plans for the next fall. And so we know different schools have different timelines, but we're thinking that we need to get that done early spring at the latest. And then at the same time, we need to train the college counselors about the alignment, really get the communication and the training out there and show them, you know, what do we really need to put our students into. And also start communicating with the high schools that we are making these changes, and this is what your students are going to see down the road. And then we're going to move to the high schools and work with the high schools and get to where their courses are aligned with these pathways. And what we need from you is like, that's your main question, like, what are you asking from me? So the higher ed leaders, we all know that we all get a lot of surveys in email, and we may not necessarily actually answer them. You know, I know I get a lot of surveys, but if the survey comes from your president or your provost, then you're likely to actually submit it and do it. So we need our higher ed leaders to send this survey out that we have ready to the programs that we've identified and designated and kind of really urge them and kind of require them to actually complete it. We need our higher ed leaders to help us ensure that you can change your course catalog by the end of March. I know different schools, like I said, have different timelines, so you may need kind of some push to get these changes in place. And then our district leaders, K-12, we need to change a commitment to change our course offerings by February 2020. So we want to get the high school course offerings changed for fall 20 and the college courses changed by fall 19. And what you are going to do now is you're going to do some group work and discussion. We want you to discuss with your table. You'll see more detail on the recommendations at your table. Each institution needs to provide one feedback form. Okay, so you'll see a feedback form. That's why we wanted you to sit together. Oh, you don't see them. They're in Susan's hand. And, and then we want you to document any concerns or feedback, and we also want you to state your support.
So you all have a little less than 15 minutes. Each table for each institution, we're going to have forms and templates. We're going to take your input because these recommendations have been worked on a lot, but they're not a done deal. We may adjust them. We want your feedback and input. And then we're going to have a small time to be able to report out if there's some key burning thing that you need to share with the rest of the room. We're going to finish this exercise by 9 o'clock, or 10 o'clock, one of the next o'clocks. Okay, we're going to wrap up in 1 minute. Okay, let's come back together, please. Y'all know I'm not a teacher, but I will make you clap if you make me. Okay, thank you very much. So again, to make sure everybody's clear, each institution should have one feedback template. We have 4 different recommendations, but they're grouped in 3 different boxes. We're going to group a couple of them together. This is your time for feedback. This is your time to help us shape this because we want to move forward with a sense of urgency. So as you were reading this first recommendation just about course alignment and how we're going to fold together course alignment, please make sure the feedback from your institution and the boxes that are checked are captured there. Is there anything that somebody feels like is critical to ask of the entire group, share with the entire group, some big aha that you had? We've just got about a minute for that. Anybody?
Good morning, everybody. Charles Cook, Provost at ACC. Part of the problem we have is that a lot of high school students, particularly when they're looking at dual credit or AP courses, they want to take, quote, the basics, get their basics out of the way, which typically translates to the core curriculum. And the default option too often is college algebra because they think that has the widest applicability no matter where you transfer, no matter what your degree is. Since the coordinating board is working on field of study curricula, which is geared to the major, perhaps there needs to be alignment of the math with the field of study curricula.
Absolutely, and we hope that that comes out in the surveys. Then when we're sending that out, we're going to get that information. Yes?
Thank you, Susan. Gene Bourgeois, the Provost at Texas State. So I don't want to go off the tangent real quick about field of study, but some of you may know that Commissioner Provost just received a letter from Bell Wheel and Sac COC about field of study, and that's actually one of our concerns, and that is by posting a requirement to change something in a catalog with only one course being the required math course. It's not quite that simple at Texas State or some of the other higher ed institutions. One has to go through a curriculum process involving the departmental faculty. For example, I'm on board with this, but if my history colleagues aren't, you got to convince them. She, and our other mathematicians at Texas State have to convince them to change that major requirement. That takes a while at Texas State. I would guess 2 years if we're lucky, although she gave me a year's running start by actually talking to the chairs at Texas State. So we're on our way there. But that comes back to that fundamental issue with SAC standards. The faculty own the curriculum, meaning the faculty in those departments of those majors own the curriculum. So it's a matter of convincing them that Either the stats heavy or the non-algebraic course option or the algebra course option is the most appropriate one for them. So the educational part of that will be very important. Susan Morey also wants to point out that for many students coming in, depending on the major they thought they wanted to be in, or if they're coming in with credit from any of you through dual credit or whatever, they may already have taken an algebra class. Now if we're requiring one non-algebra class for their major, that's a problem. So she wants to keep open those pathways and the bridges, as you were calling them, to ensure that that student's math that they already took would still satisfy us at Texas State. I think those are the two major ones. Anything else? That's it.
Those are great feedback, so let me just reflect on the two things. Starting with the last one, we've talked a lot about this in our group, and we feel as if providing one appropriate math class as the way into that department or major is the way to start, but certainly there would absolutely be options for faculty and counselors to say, okay, if you already took X math, we agree that that's appropriate and that's fine. We just didn't want to default them into 6 different maths and have the ping pong ball, what do you call it, machine? Pinball machine effect, that one. The other thing is the speed. We are asking you all to act with a sense of urgency to the degree that we can push our institutions to move with that speed. We really need to do it. To the degree that it's absolutely impossible, you tell us. So that's what we want in those recommendations when you give us the feedback, so we can take that all into account as we move forward. But don't be willing to start with the no. Start with the yes and let's figure out how to get there. And then if we have to back up to the no, we'll have to back up to the no. Okay, we're going to go on to our second and third recommendations. Back to Derek McDaniel.
Okay, so the teaching and learning recommendations really center around how do we address the conceptual misunderstanding that students have that's keeping them from success whenever they get to higher ed. And when we got secondary and post-secondary faculty together and we started talking about what are we actually seeing in our courses, there were really a few key differences that we noticed between secondary and post-secondary. The one most obvious one was at secondary, the reliance on multiple choice for math assessments. The majority of what we see at secondary are multiple choice items. When they get to post-secondary, that changes and it becomes free response, open-ended response types of items, and our students are struggling. And we know why, right? At the state assessment level for secondary, that's what we see. And we feel like we're doing in the best interest of our students to prepare our students for the assessment that they have to take at the end of their high school year. But it's not serving them well for whenever they get to higher ed. The next key difference that we noticed and we heard was the role of the graphing calculator and the over-reliance at secondary on the graphing calculator. They get to post-secondary, and that's not there for them all the time. And those two key differences we feel like we have to address. And so what we're recommending is to create a working task force of secondary and post-secondary faculty to come together and start developing open-ended, rubric-graded assessments that could be implemented at the secondary level, specifically Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, and Statistics. And we have this vision of getting them together to work and develop and communicate. How do we establish these assessments that we could then use for backwards to design to affect our instruction in our lessons and better prepare students for higher ed? I hear math faculty at high schools all the time tell me, I'm preparing them for college. I'm preparing them for college. And I think, when's the last time you sat down with a mathematics professor and discussed assessments? And so we can do that. We can control that, and we can get these two entities together, these two groups of professors and teachers together to form a working group and develop those assessments that could then be used to affect that backwards design instructional model. So that's really the first one for our teaching and learning recommendations. Along with that, and we're presenting these together because this working group would really address both of them, and that would be the non-cognitive skills. We know probably more than any other discipline, study skills, time management, growth mindset, productive struggle, those things come out in math courses, and they're killing our kids in developmental ed and our post-secondary math courses. And so how do we get this working group to also address those skills and explicitly teach them in our mathematics courses at the secondary level? And so we kind of lump those two together for these purposes. Our timeline. So we're looking at to develop this working group in the next 3 months. Identify someone from your secondary, from your post-secondary that could participate on this committee. Develop those assessments, which I know we could do it rather quickly. If we get these people together, we can develop the few assessment items that would be needed at those 4 courses in the next month. And then how do we start embedding them and getting them ready for the following school year to be implemented in 1920? Okay, we know that we can't affect our assessments for 18-19. We're there already. This would have to go into effect for next year, but we have to start now. And also developing the non-cognitives and getting those in our curriculum so that we could implement practice. And so what do we need from you? Assign a representative. Who from your district, who from your higher ed is going to participate in this working group so that we can get it in by 1920 and 2021 for the non-cogs. So we're going to work with our tables. What's our time for this group? About 10 minutes. So address both of those recommendations together.
Okay. Let's come back together. We've heard some great discussion at all the tables. We're still hearing great discussion at all the tables. So thank you. Y'all have heard now 3 of the 4 major recommendations. Again, I've seen people referring to them, but there's more detail on everybody's table about what these recommendations actually are. Please give us your feedback. We've heard a lot of people say, I asked this question, I recommend this. Make sure you capture it. We are going to bring that all together and make sure that it's represented in these set of recommendations. So thank you. You've heard our recommendations about alignment itself, which is doable. We can do that. We can do that ourselves. We own those practices. We can change them. You've heard of our recommendations about teaching and learning, both pedagogy as well as non-cognitive skills. We own that. We can do that. Those are our practices. Our last one that we'll need a little help with, because some of this can happen locally, but some of this is only at a state level, has to do with policy. So let's go on to the last recommendation. Again, we're going to give you time to talk and think about it. Before we do that, was there anybody that has something that they absolutely want to share about the teaching and learning? Brandy, I heard you might have something. Not that I'm pointing you out or anything.
I'm sure someone from my group will gladly share it.
Yes, no?
You don't remember.
Okay, anybody else? Teaching and learning that you feel a burning aha or a burning recommendation to share or a concern? Yeah, Teresa.
Okay. Hi, I'm Teresa Hill, Director of Program Support and Guidance with Elgin ISD. One of the things that we talked about is also an alignment concern within teaching and learning recommendations. So we talked exclusively a lot about technology and technology integration and how the math TEKs at K-12 require technology to be utilized throughout. And then we also talked about a lot of assessment driving the use of technology. So from AP exams that have a portion that requires calculators and a portion that requires non-calculator to our exams with the state and TEA saying that we can use calculators on our math assessments starting in 8th grade. So there needs to be some further kind of alignment in talking about best practices with integrating technology, how we do that effectively in the math classroom, and making sure that we're not just saying no, don't use calculators, but how do we use them effectively?
Perfect. Excellent, thank you. Anything else that you feel like is worth sharing with the whole group? Okay, then I'm going to turn it back over to Carolyn. Policy.
All right, so policy, as I'm walking up here, we talked a lot about, in general, how do we determine college readiness? And that's something that we don't, as a region, we don't really have full control over, but we do feel like it's an issue. And the overarching issue that we all kind of agreed on is that we're mainly assessing college readiness based on algebraic skills. And we're not addressing or even looking at or having a way to show the students statistical knowledge or the quantitative reasoning, all of the different critical thinking math skills. We're really focusing in our assessment and in our college readiness indicators on just algebra. So, it even starts there as we're talking about alignment. This kind of goes in with alignment. So we want to align college readiness assessment, admissions, and advising policies to reflect the math preparation students need to complete the degree or credentials associated with their career aspirations. And so, like I said, we want a way to identify skills in what we traditionally call the non-STEM math skills. For example, algebraically, like statistics is very different skills, right? It's a very different set of skills, but it's still very high level. It's not like we're talking about kind of watering down the math content or watering down their readiness. It's a different type of readiness. For example, factoring polynomials to find the zeros is an algebraic skill, right? Everyone's kind of, maybe you remember that, maybe you don't want to. But, analyzing using statistical inferences to determine whether a study is valid or not, that is equally as rigorous, but that is a non-algebraic skill. And so what we want to do is we want to, currently we have a single test score, and it's pretty much a kind of algebraic focus, the assessment and the way that they get that test score. And so we want to pursue state policy that allows post-secondary institutions to assess students' readiness for pathways required for their major or program of study. So, right now we are tied to, what we're required to use for assessment. So what we would like to see is a way for this assessment to determine algebraic and non-algebraic math skills. So we could potentially have maybe, there are a lot of different ways, but maybe two different scores, an algebraic score and a non-algebraic score, and we can say, okay, well, they're college ready, they're college ready for statistics, but they don't know enough algebra right now to be college ready for college algebra or calculus. So we're talking about that. We talked about, and you'll see some more details on the documents that you have on your table. But we also talked about, this is really vital because, as we're talking about, not everyone needs college algebra, not everyone needs calculus, but we're still assessing them. Are you ready for calculus or are you not? And that's really, we don't feel as a group, we didn't feel like that meant college ready. And let's see, and along with this, we would need to work on admissions and advising policies and practices. So this is a big shift in advising at the high school levels and advising at the college level, and just this, again, this kind of ties into alignment, but you need to really talk about, like, there is more than just algebra and algebraic readiness. And we also talked about updating, we've talked a little bit about this before too, updating the K-12 district policies to require 4 years of high school math. Now, we're not talking about 4 years of math where they all take pre-calculus and calculus, but having students take a high school statistics course. Statistics is getting to be pretty vital in the world today. It's kind of getting to where everyone needs to know something about statistics because they're thrown around everywhere and used to prove things, and we need to have a better sense of what that means. And we want to be able to allow students to seamlessly transition into college level mathematics. And let's go on. Oh, we didn't have what are we asking from you this time? So what we are recommending that we do is we want to meet with the coordinating board and talk about reviewing and revising potentially the TSI assessment. And again, kind of talking about timing, this seems like a good time for that because it's, and I might misspeak, I'm looking at Susan because I don't know the details. I think they signed on, there's like one more year, just 1 year of the contract. So, you know, it's a good time to maybe like work in some changes to that assessment or look at alternatives. And we would be doing this kind of through March of next year. Obviously, this part is not something we can change locally, but we can actually kind of, as a group, say we really think this is important as this large region and go and maybe hopefully make some change. And we want to review and revise local district policies to support advanced math course taking. So kind of really look at like, what do we want our students to take? I know when I was in this group, I was kind of shocked at the sheer number of high school math courses there were. I had no idea that there were like, you know, like 25, they had them all listed and I was like, what? And I couldn't even imagine being a student and going, okay, what do I take? I have no idea. There's like 20 options. It's too many choices. So we really want to start working together and kind of looking at like what do these courses need to be and like what courses are best for our students and, you know, and understanding all of the you know, different kind of requirements and details and different intricacies we don't understand when we're at like one group versus the other, you know, secondary versus post-secondary. We have very different kind of parameters around what we have to do. And review and advise higher ed admissions and advising policies. So just really looking at, you know, again, like in high schools, they think, we're kind of talking about this at our table, like they still think like, you know, well, if they're dual credit, well then college algebra, or they have to do algebra because that's what the colleges want. And so we really need to kind of work on like, what are we looking for at the college level? Like, are we looking for more than just algebra? Hopefully, because there's a lot like statistics or the quantitative reasoning. We want students to be able to understand how mortgages and credit cards work, right? That's in quantitative reasoning. As a side note, I've seen more students in my quantitative reasoning course come back with stories of the ways that this class like helped them change their lives pretty drastically. And a lot of it's that finance section. I mean, it's very, you know, it gives them a lot of different, opens doors for them and gives them opportunities. So this came after. So what we need from you is we need a team of influencers to support the state policy change. So we kind of want to know who would be willing to come with us to go and talk with the coordinating board to see what we can change and what we can't. Hopefully, what we will change. Sorry, I need to be more bold. What we will change and what we can change, because we feel like this is really vital, and we feel like this assessment and the college readiness determinations are really holding us back from what we need to do. And we also feel like we're kind of putting a bunch of students into dev ed who don't need to be there because they could, you know, they may not know algebra front and back, but they could do really well in statistics class, or they have that kind of knowledge, or they have the critical thinking they need for this quantitative reasoning course. And we all kind of saw what happens if they get thrown into dev ed. A lot of them don't get out. That's where we lose them. So we want to update local policies. We want your support to update local policies to support appropriate math course taking. So same thing, work with your group, discuss with your table, document concerns and feedback, and state your support.
So we've got about 15 minutes. This is your last chance for feedback. If you want to bring it back around, go to all the recommendations and think about the feedback that you want to give us, but most especially on the policy, and think about both local policies that you can change without asking anybody and the state policy that we need to change. We've got 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes. Again, capture any final recommendations, any concerns, any barriers you can help us with, feedback that you've got.
Problematic. What's 10 o'clock car? Okay, that's a good train. What? I'm a little afraid of it.
Okay, let's come back together. Wow, that worked that time. Thank you all for your hard work. Thank you for taking the time to discuss, taking the time to think about feedback, giving us your recommendations. We've now talked about course alignment itself, teaching and learning, and now policy, both what we call the capital P policy, state level changes that we think we can and should do. This should not require changes to law. It does require changes to rulemaking. That's not always easy, but we need to be together on it. And little p policy that we can change locally. Who has feedback on any of those that you feel burning to share with others? Concerns, thoughts, ahas? Yeah.
My one concern, I started working with TSI as Dean of University College in South Texas 13 years ago, and I do like the idea of adjusting and developing different ways to assess college readiness based upon one test, but having lived through the world of having the AccuPlacer Compass, THEA, Quick THEA, Asset, ACT, SAT, tax score as ways to exempt TSI, I don't know that we want to go back to that kind of alphabet soup environment. So I believe we're supportive of having a more robust TSI assessment that would allow us to do a better job of assessing the students' readiness for the pathways of mathematics, but please don't make me do the CBM 002 with all those tests again.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. And just as a quick feedback as the subcommittee that was working on policy started out by saying, well, let's have one cut score for quantitative reasoning and one cut score for geometric reasoning and one cut score for algebraic reasoning, one course, and then finally we said, oh, the admissions officers will kill us. And it'll probably be way too complicated. So we backed up, as Carolyn explained, to say maybe we should just go with algebraically intensive and non-algebraically intensive with the same assessment, but different ways to prove readiness. And we think that that should be very doable. Who else? Other observations or input? Thoughts? Come on, y'all are very quiet this morning. Not enough sugar. Anyone? Okay, well, let's move to the final part. First, I would like to express our sincere thanks on behalf of the Dana Center and behalf of E3 Alliance, not just to our task force, who you saw before, or at least almost all of them are here, who have really done incredible work and didn't know they're still going to have to do work because of all the feedback that you've given us, but we will be continuing this effort. I also want to very much thank the people who have helped sponsor the work and help support it. That includes Greater Texas Foundation, who is here, as well as Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, as well as the Noyce Foundation. They are all very, very supportive of taking this work and building on it and sustaining it. So thank you very much for the financial resources to try to bring it forward. I want to remind you of our charge, right? Derek shared with you that there are 5 college presidents and 8 superintendents who told us thou shalt. It was Dr. Treisman who said, you know, we really need some weight behind this because y'all need to make some recommendations, but they need to carry some weight. They need to have some people behind them. They need to have some gravitas. We hope and believe that we have that gravitas with our leaders from our institutions of higher education and our school districts behind us to push this forward, to really be bold. So with that in mind, hold up your sheets. Hold them up. Let me see them. Everybody should have a sheet. Please, before you go, your institution should have filled out whatever feedback, whatever recommendations, whatever barriers. Also make sure you give us those 2 names. We need a name for the teaching and learning work group, and we need a name for something else that I don't recall, but whatever's on there, make sure that you do it, and make sure that you don't walk outside and put this on the passenger seat of your car, right? So Eric, raise your hand. Eric Bird, Lindsay, raise your hand. Give your sheet before you go to either Eric or Lindsay or myself so we can pull these all together, okay? Before you go. Now, one other thing. Remember that after each of these recommendations, we said, what can you do? We can't do this by ourselves. We need you all. We tried to be very specific about these are the actions we need you to take. One of those is due tomorrow, right? So if you are the leading person at an institution of higher education here, please stand up. Archie, Jean, Charles? Okay. Southwestern just left, but they're here. They know that. We are asking you to send out this survey to your department heads that we have identified tomorrow. You will get it in mail from me today. We're going to start this process, and we're going to start the backwards alignment and making sure that it works across the region. There are going to be many other things for everybody else to do. Y'all can sit back down now. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure everybody knows and is looking at you. But there are lots of other things that we all will be part of doing. You'll get those from us, again, in an email. So everybody who's here and everybody that you want to share it with knows specifically what we're doing. Okay? Got it? I hope everybody knows, and if you don't know, you should know, Bobby Jenkins. Bobby Jenkins is CEO of ABC Home and Commercial Services. He is a renowned business leader, former chair of the Chamber of Commerce. He employs 850 people here in the Central Texas region and has 2 brothers who employ just about that many in Dallas and Houston and San Antonio and all over the state. They employ people every day who need to have strong mathematics skills because you don't want them mixing chemicals with the wrong proportions and bringing them into your house. But that may not necessarily be calculus. He is a great example of somebody who is our collective customer. He also is former chair of the Higher Education Coordinating Board, and so he can help us with some of these policy changes that we need to make. We've asked Bobby to close it out today.
Thank you, Susan. And let me tell you, I am fired up. This has been, I got to sit with my friends from Leander over here, and we had great conversation. I'm not just fired up, I'm motivated. And so I just want to tell you how much I appreciate y'all letting me sit in on the conversation. The other thing that gets me fired up when I come to a meeting like this, man, every time I'm around Susan Dawson, I get inspired, and I get inspired about education. And let's give Susan a big round of applause. Susan and E3, I was saying to the folks at my table, I hope everybody in Central Texas understands what an incredibly valuable asset we have in the E3 Alliance. It's amazing the work that they do, the data that they do, the information they provide, the leadership they provide. It's so valuable to all of us who are trying to build a community where education matters, where we can all be successful. So again, thank you, Susan. And to the task force, to the work that you've been doing, thank you so much for taking the time to do it. It's absolutely critical work. The other thought that I had when I was thinking about this at the very beginning, so I spend a little bit of money on TV and radio and that kind of stuff, right? So you like to have those buzz things, right? And I've been thinking about, the buzz line for me is math matters. And I think about that simplistically, and yet it really is so true. What's going to determine, are our children going to be successful? I think that the component of math is absolutely foundational to what that all means. We know that we've got a system that needs to be worked on. It needs to have some tweaks and some changes. Where we are today after House Bill 5, I'm not sure we all thought this is exactly where we would be. Sometimes the pendulum swings and it moves too far one direction or the other. I think what we're talking about today, the work that you're doing right now, is a way to move that pendulum into a place that is in a better place. We've got to serve our students better. That's our job. That's our responsibility. We've got to address the inequity that we talked about earlier. The other thing is we've got to get so many more students involved in college. So coming from the coordinating board, absolutely right. The strategic plan, I just can't stress enough to you how important to everybody in Texas 60 by 30 is. It's a numbers game. We've got to educate more people. We can't fall further behind. I will tell you this, in many respects, Texas don't do great. All right? We've got work to do. We really, really do. We can't sit here and think and get complacent. Even with that strategic plan where 60% of all Texans between 24 and 35 have some kind of post-degree, right? And it can be a certificate, it can be a 2-year degree, 4-year, whatever it is. We've got to achieve that number. If we don't, failure is what's going to be there, because our economic continued prosperity really is dependent upon that. And so, yes, what Susan said is 100% right. I talk about that all the time. At my company, I need people who can think. I need problem solvers. It's not, how do I measure? How do I calculate square feet? What do I do? I mean, my gosh, we were saying over at my table, I've got plumbers, electricians, people who work with HVAC, all the gambit of the things that happen out there. In the trade world, higher education is an absolute component. Are they or are they not going to be successful? What's that mean for their career? How can they continue to rise and be successful in that? We talked also about alignment. I love that conversation. Having K through 12 aligned with higher ed. That is the holy grail as far as I'm concerned. How do we make sure that we do that? We have to do that so that the children, those career aspirations, what they want to be when they're young, they're able to follow that path all the way through the system and make that efficient. It's another thing that is very, very important to us as a state and as a community. We've got to be efficient in this process. We can't, I'm going to steal that. The flipper thing, right? The pinball deal, because we see that, and kids get lost in the system. There is nothing worse for all of us in this state than a young person makes the attempt, steps into higher ed, bounces around, and falls out, right? We never get them back. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. That is just a great realization of what we have. So we've got recommendations, and it's really up to the people in a group like this to really take that leadership role and make something happen. I think that we've got everything that I've seen today. It's all doable. This can be done. Nothing that we've talked about here, A, it makes perfectly good sense, and B, it can be done. It's just going to take people like the people in this group who take action. Right? We just got to do it. That Nike deal of just do it is really what we've got to talk about here and what we've got to be doing. So again, I think we've got a plan that works. It's a plan that makes sense. I think it's a plan that everybody can get behind. We've just got to get out there and get the message there. So I do want to thank each and every one of you for what you do for the students in this state. Your role is absolutely critical to the success of this state. I kind of come at it from the business side and talk about economic prosperity and the economy, and jobs is really what it matters. But without what you do, we won't have people who have jobs. We won't have people who will drive the economy and make it successful. So thank you all for being here. Susan, again, to E3 and to our sponsors, I can't tell you how much we appreciate the great work that we're doing. And thank you for having me to have the chance to come out here and get to visit with y'all. And thanks to my Leander buddies for letting me sit with y'all. Thank y'all very much.